Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Bird Lady Rollerpigeons. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, it's me again. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Possibly the best dressed guest I've ever had.
That was certainly probably the most interesting outfit a guest might have had on your show, but we're still early in the game.
That's true. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that ever worn a costume on the podcast. No, I should change that. Well, we're changing that today, so that's exciting. For people listening, she is wearing a bird costume, which is just fantastic. Yellow and green. Do you know what bird it's meant to be?
I'm a budgie. I'm a
You're a
budgie.
budgie. Okay. Well, that's my uncle's nickname. And it was, I think I was about 16 when I finally learned his real name. And I was like, hang on, Budgie's not your name? Like, um, so, as I mentioned before we started, the reason that I got in touch with you was because someone reached out to me and said that, Josh, you have to cover this TPL story. TLP. And basically, I had seen it a couple times mentioned on Super Stonk on the GameStop subreddit. Not the only GameStop subreddit, I must say, but the main one. And then, yeah, I sort of just it's one too many rabbit holes to jump down. There's so much going on with the entire story, and I hadn't really thought much more of it. I had accidentally looked at metamaterials as a company that I might like to do some research into and possibly even interview the CEO, and that was before I realized that it was connected in this way with all of the
Ah.
yeah the share merging and the taking it trying to take it off the Nasdaq, and then yesterday I was speaking to Houston Wade, so this will be the episode after that interview, so people who have listened to that will have been given a very brief overview of this story, but it sounded absolutely bonkers, so I'm very very excited to go through this all with you. um so, do you want to start just and give people a brief background on who you are and how you came to this story?
Yes. Can you hold on just 1 minute? Sorry.
Yeah, no
Hold on
problem.
just 1 minute. Put me on pause. Hold on.
That's all right.
Uh, yes. Hold on. This is for at work on off the top of my head, period. Okay. So, all right, we can keep going. Sorry, I had to reply to a thing at work.
That's all
So
right.
it's been hectic past few days at work. So, okay. So, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
So
I got
that's all right. So
sidetracked.
how did you come to what's your background in
Right.
finance or if you have any, and
Sure.
then how did you find this story?
Okay. So, this story, how I found it. Well, okay. So, how I found this particular play is I actually was looking for a metamaterials company that could be invested in. I said, it might be time to start looking into metamaterials. It's very futuristic. Are there any metamaterial companies out there yet? Any ones big enough? And can I invest in them? So I started looking it up and I came across Metamaterials Incorporated, which was in Canada. And luckily for me, they weren't quite, they were on the Canadian Stock Exchange at the time. This is December 2020, but they were looking to get on the NASDAQ sometime at that time. It was by March 2021 is at that time. That's what they had planned. March 2021, they were going to be on the NASDAQ and they were doing a reverse takeover with this little oil and gas company called Torchlight. And so then I started looking into Torchlight, and I have more of a background with oil and gas than I do with finance. So I immediately took a vested interest in Torchlight, and I got very excited by what I saw, the oil and gas potential, and basically the person who was behind it, Rich Masterson, who had a history with uh, Texaco. He also had a history with shoot, sorry, it's fleeting my memory. Sorry, hold on just a second. It's not Monsanto. Give me 1 second.
That's all right. Um,
Give me one. Yeah.
yeah, Monsanto, is it? No.
No, I want to say, let's see here. Uh, I don't want to say Monsanto. It's one of those companies. Um, oh, it is Monsanto. I
Okay.
was right. Ah,
Wonderful.
okay,
Oh, but one
sorry.
of the world's greatest and most wonderful companies.
Uh, okay, yes. Well, they're known for their GMOs, but of course, they do need petroleum to make a lot of their products. So he had done work with Texaco Monsanto, and he wasn't small potatoes, more or less. He was pretty well known in the Midland Basin. And so I really looked into the Oro Grande property, the Oro Grande field, and the presentation at the time said that this was the largest discovery in over 30 years. Now it's pretty much over 40 years, the largest onshore domestic US discovery for oil and gas.
Wow.
And the more I looked into it, yeah, it's pretty big. It's a pretty big area. It's large. It's largely underdeveloped. Now, there were,
So where is this in the
historically
country?
speaking, yes. Okay, so this is in the far corner of Texas. It's 40 miles east of El Paso in a county called Hudspeth County. And this is almost on the border of Hudspeth and El Paso County. And this particular field sits on private lands. Although it is owned by university lands, the land itself is considered private in Texas. So while a university lands does own it, it's considered private. University lands, like many other Texas institutions, once Texas became a state, it set aside quite a bit of land to raise money for schools and for education. For example, my farm is the original survey is schoolhouse so and so because it was part of the school lands property. And when it was sold originally in the 1800s, that money went for school. So yeah, if you see El Paso there, now go
Yeah.
east of El Paso. That's west. Go east. Yeah. Okay. Wait. Up north. There's a road, 62. There's that little road that runs
62. Yeah,
due
there
east
it
of El
is.
Paso. Yeah. Okay. So you want to head west, go more like towards El Paso.
Okay. So like in here,
Okay, head
in
west a
here.
little bit. Yeah. See that little box? Yeah, it's just east of that little box. Okay.
Okay, so in here.
On the road, yeah. Where your mouse is, what? That's where the property is.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to get an idea of where we were. So that's where
Yeah.
they've struck the largest onshore discovery of oil in like decades.
Yes, decades, yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's interesting. Did not
Now,
know
when
that.
I say, yeah, so when I say onshore oil, I don't mean like when people think oil reserves, a lot of people think like there's a river underground of oil. That's not really how oil and gas works. It's more or less that the rock is very porous. Think of you like taking a quart of oil and dumping it on your concrete driveway and it seeps into your driveway. That's pretty much how it is. And it's the porosity and the pressure of the rock that determines largely the output. However, technology has advanced in the past 20 years that allows us to tap into more unconventional plays. You have conventional, unconventional plays. In the past, your conventional plays where you stuck a vertical pipe in the ground. Ta-da! Oil and gas comes out. And then they started getting into fracking. By 2007, fracking was really taking off. And today it's a lot more complex and fracking's really more fine-tuned. You can't compare fracking today or fracking of, 20 years ago. There's no comparison. It's like,
So
a
why
Model A
what's the difference? I
versus a
don't know that much
Ferrari.
about fracking
Okay.
aside
Okay.
from like
Yeah.
it's pumping wastewater into the ground to like get the oil out. That's the summation
Okay.
of my understanding.
Right. Okay. So fracking, the best way to say it is, okay, so you have wells that go up and down. Okay. Um, let me get I'm known for white whiteboards, by the way, on my channel, and so
Yes,
lots of
yes, I
people on my
did enjoy.
channel know.
I enjoy
Okay,
some of your whiteboard stuff. It's great. I love diagrams.
okay, awesome. Right. Okay. So Houston Wade's actually a good guy because he's a geologist. Houston Wade's the geologist guy, but he can attest to this. So in oil and gas, you have like here's the ground, here's a tree. So you have like, your topsoil layers and, so you have like your soil and then you get into rock or different shales essentially. So you have different types of rock at different levels depending on the geological events of the area. And so it goes like this, or it can go like this depending on the topography, what was once there a
Yeah,
while
yeah.
ago. So you have these are called different zones, different plays, and they have funny names. Like the further you go down, and it's named more or less after certain time periods, and sometimes they're named after people. So you have things like Sperry or Wolfbone. Rich Masterson's the guy who discovered the Wolfbone play, by the way, in the Permian Basin. That's one of these layers of rock.
Okay.
So he was the guy who discovered it, Rich Masterson. And so he's Big Potatoes. In the movie, it's called The Iron Orchard. They actually did a nod to him by talking about the wolf bone. Like, check out the wolf bone. It's so productive. That's a nod to Rich Masterson. So you have these shales, and when you do a conventional drill in the past, you stick a big pipe in the ground, or you drill a hole, you stick a pipe in there, and the outside of this pipe's concrete. And then this rock is full of porous holes, and there's pressure, and basically, the oil and gas can get pumped into here. There's pumps up here. It looks like, a lot of them look like a little horse head going up and down. So that's how they used to do it, and they still do it like that way in some areas. And then you are able to get into harder to reach zones. Let's say you can't get into the rock up here, but there's oil and gas up there, but it doesn't have the natural porosity, or maybe it does have the natural porosity, but you have to kind of create fractures in the rock, hydraulic fractures, fracking. So you drill vertical and then you drill horizontal. Not every horizontal well or lateral well, by the way, requires fracking either. Some of them you're fine. It depends on the rock. So you drill this way and you drill this way, and then you put in perforations, which basically you send hydraulic trucks up and they pump fluid down,
Mhm.
and that basically goes crack, the hydraulic pressure. So it cracks the rock, and then you pack it full of sand. You got to pack it full of sand, else everything's going to collapse. So you got to pack it full of special sand, and that creates the pathways for the oil and gas to come out better. So that's hydraulic fracturing right
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And the hydraulic fluid is the water essentially. The nice thing about this property, the Oro Grande, is it sits on a couple of aquifers, both fresh and saltwater aquifers. So you don't have to truck in and out you don't have to truck in the water, and it saves quite a bit of money by
Mm.
not trucking in the water. That's one of the things, at least for the Midland Basin, and as well as the Delaware Basin, is that a lot of times water has to be trucked in. Or you
Yeah.
can get it on if you're by a pipeline, sometimes you can get off the pipeline,
Mm.
but a lot of times it has to be trucked in. That's significant cost. The nice thing about this property, the Oro Grande, is it has the aquifers on it. You don't have to really truck in water. That's significant savings, especially with fuel costs being high. And they do have some water wells on property ready to go right now, which is really nice. So, I I have some background in oil and gas, and I got really excited about this oil and gas find. I was excited about metamaterials too, but I was excited about the oil and gas. And so by January 2021, I had bought shares in both MMATF, that was the Metamaterials Canadian ticker symbol before they merged,
Mhm.
as well as Torchlight Energy, which was going to be what was going to be taken over.
Okay. So Torchlight was the one owned by Rick Masterson.
Well, he doesn't own it. He's the guy who discovered it. Partially he owns it with McCabe. Greg McCabe is the guy's name. Greg McCabe is the primary holder of the property,
Mhm.
as well as Torchlight Energy. Torchlight Energy owns most of the oil and gas rights to it.
Okay.
It owns overall 49.9% of the oil and gas rights.
Okay. So you've seen this company Torchlight, and they
Hmm.
have this massive. They're sitting on top of this massive field to which they have most of the
Yes.
rights. And you've been
Hmm.
looking at MMTAF. Did you say it was the
MMATF. Yeah,
MMATF?
MMATF.
Sorry, MMATF. And then so you were looking at there because you were thinking, okay, metamaterials, interest in like
Right.
futuristic kind of like technology, like interest in like tech to get involved in, like possibly nice big upside potential because of the see where the tech goes. So then,
Right.
what was it like? Had you identified these two like companies independent of each other before they tried the merger?
Well, by then they had announced the merger. By
Okay.
then, by December, they had announced it. They announced it shortly after September of 20, or it was about October when they announced it. So I had just come across it shortly after they announced it. And by then they were sort of synonymous with each other at that point.
Okay, wonderful. So that was 2020, that's September 2021, right?
Right, yeah, it's when they announced it.
Okay.
I looked at it December, I got it in January.
Okay, wonderful. So apparently they were already talking about the merger in March of 2021. That's interesting.
Right. That was the original date for the merger. It got delayed quite a bit. It got delayed back and forth. There was paperwork that had to be resubmitted, and then by the time they resubmitted that and they got comments on that paperwork, Finra basically said, "Well, that this other part's expired now. You got to go back and do it." And it wound up being from March to June, essentially, is when the reverse takeover happened.
Okay. So then there was so what so right there was like some complicated thing with how the shares were going to be arranged with the merger.
Right. Yes. Okay. So this one, yeah, this one, a lot of people still,
And
uh,
maybe just also for clarity for people. So what
yeah.
the so Metamaterials wanted to get listed on the Nasdaq, and then they wanted to do a merger with Torchlight Energy, who were already
Hmm.
listed on the Nasdaq, so that they could be listed on the Nasdaq basically.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, that's correct. A lot of people, this was right after SPACs kind of went down. SPACs were really popular, early 2000, 2001, like SPACs were really popular. And you have a SPAC company, a blank check company. This is a little bit different than the SPAC, but basically it's an easier way to get onto the market,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Is it like sort of like the reverse mergers that a lot of these Chinese companies were doing around 2008, 9 to get listed on the New York Stock Exchange? Maybe this is not your
Like,
area of expertise like
right.
specifically.
Right. I know a lot about Chinese culture and stuff. In terms of like Chinese companies doing that, maybe I'm not sure. I have no, yeah, clear idea about that.
Okay, well,
So I
people can
can't
check
answer
out
that question for you.
there's a
Yeah.
fantastic documentary on it called The China Short, where basically a bunch of companies were from China were doing reverse mergers with U.S. companies in order to get listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the Nasdaq or some sort of American stock exchange, and they were massively inflating their figures in terms of like how big the company was, what they owned in China, like how much their revenue was, what they were selling, and then
That's very common with all the companies there. Yes.
so they
That's
were
very
massively
common.
inflating it, and then when they went to like to do the mergers, then obviously people look at the books and go, well, this company is worth however many millions, and then they're it's like a shed in someone's back garden in Shenzhen. And so a bunch of like US like sort of rogue, I don't even know what you'd call them, financiers started going doing investigations into these companies, figuring out that they were worth nothing, shorting them like fuck, and then releasing their report on it, and then making like millions and millions and millions and millions as like they saw themselves as like activist investors. I'm not quite sure if I would
Hmm.
describe them as that, But it's a really interesting documentary. I'm pretty sure it's still on Netflix if anyone wants to check it out.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for letting me know about that. I'm definitely going to check it out. It's sort of reminding, well, that's so it's interesting that you mentioned that. So Torchlight as a company, of course, was hit hard by 2020 and the whole COVID-19, the whole oil industry
Mhm.
shut down. So oil, to produce a barrel of oil, it costs money, right? It costs money to transport that oil, it costs money to refine that oil. You have to pay taxes on the oil when you get out the ground. You have to do this, royalty fees, all that. So the average cost to produce a barrel of oil in 2020 was $25. Today it's 35 to 37. But in 2020, it was $25 a barrel to produce oil. That was the cost of goods sold. And oil had gone down below $25 a barrel. Hence, they would lose money producing oil. It costs more money to produce the oil than what you'd sell it for. And as a result, a lot of things shut down, but luckily nobody was driving. A lot of the oil industry took a big hit from that. Torchlight being one of those companies. Torchlight had struggled due to, I want to call them short and distort reports. So you mentioned the China short. They saw themselves as activists. They would say, hey, it's not a conglomerate. It's, some sort of, shed and a hutong in Beijing. And, it's not this big company with these big reports as it shows on paper, right? So short and distort reports are basically they'll take a short position in a company and then they'll release rather inflated information about it or skewed information about it. They'll release very opinionated pieces about these companies. The price goes down, of course, and thus Torchlight had a difficult time raising capital to further develop this oil property because every time, even on good news, such as, we just got a third party confirmation about the oil and gas. Yes, it's there. As much gas as we thought that we had does exist. Here's the third party report on that based on the well logs. Instead, a short and distort report is released and the price goes down. So people, when they say, oh, news is out about the company, but the price is going down, oh, it must be bad news, right? Don't buy this or short it or sell. It creates that effect, right? And so Torchlight had a very hard time and they were looking to exit out of the NASDAQ, more or less. And one reason why they chose Meta is because Meta let them sell the assets or distribute the assets on their schedule. A lot of other companies were like, no, get rid of the oil and gas. Torchlight wanted to either sell or spin out the assets because the goal of the Ore Grande was always to sell it when the market was correct, when the market was right for that, and not to be too hasty. And Meta agreed to that. That was one of the terms, of course. Then it had to go to a spin out to get the oil and gas off the books for Meta. But yeah, the Torchlight, unfortunately, it suffered from the China short effect.
Yeah. Okay, so just to clarify what you're saying here. So basically
Mm-hmm.
they were pumping the oil out of the ground, but then it
Well,
was the oil
okay,
and gas.
they weren't pumping it. So okay, I'll take it back. So they were pumping. So some of the assets that they had, they were pumping oil and gas.
Mhm.
The Oil Grande, they were not pumping oil and gas yet.
Okay.
So it was just for it was just for test confirmation, and it was a flowback test. That's what it's called, the flowback test. But on that particular property, they're not pumping, and they're still not pumping oil and gas out. Well, they couldn't do it on Meta's books because Meta couldn't have oil and gas on their books. Because if you're pumping oil and gas, then you're selling oil and gas, and that changes like the whole valuation of the property, and then you have to report it on the books. If a property isn't pumping oil and gas, you don't have to report its worth on the books,
Okay.
accounting wise.
Okay.
It's a specific oil and gas accounting thing. Yeah. And that's led a lot of people to short and distort. One reason why they short and distorted the Ore Grande, because and Torchlight because if you're not pumping oil and gas, then the worth of the oil and gas asset isn't as much on the books as a $0 value, and thus they always look at, assets on hand on the books. See, it says 77 million. The Oro Grande isn't worth much, and you try to explain to them how this works. Look, here's the paper. This is how ConocoPhillips even does it. That people won't have any of it. They have their own opinions, and they can't. It's if they don't want to be convinced otherwise. So yeah, that's a big, big problem right there, or a big issue. One of the issues, I should say.
Okay. Okay, so they were sitting on top of this property, but they hadn't like pumped any of it out.
Right.
And
It was very limited.
yeah, okay. So then metamaterials come in and they don't want to have this on their books, so it has to be like held as something different it's the I think it was the preferred class A stock, so it had represented this value of the stuff that was still in the ground.
Yes.
Okay. So you had that, and then there was some other like weird thing that where the way the way that the shares merged. So like what was going on there? I
Right.
can't remember the exact
Okay.
thing.
Right. So when metamaterials merged with Torchlight, that's what we're on. Metamaterials, here's Meta. Right. Here's Torchlight. When they merge, reverse takeover, they have a new entity, right? It's Meta. This company owns 75%. Torchlight, if you had a Torchlight share, you got a 25% stake in it. Okay. And how they reflected that was if you had MMATF shares at the time, you would get extra shares.
Okay.
And then if you had Torchlight shares at the time, you would get the Series A preferred, which represented the oil and gas, your oil and gas that you're entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
And then a 1-to-1, but overall their shares were 25% of the company in MMAT. So that's how it was designed.
Okay. Wonderful. So then the deal that the way that Houston explained it to me was that basically so these Series A or Class A preferred shares were not meant to be traded. That was just meant that they so when he said they weren't meant to be traded, like how does that work if there's shares? Like why were they not allowed to be traded?
Sure. Okay, so the Series A preferred share, correct, was not intended to be traded. And there was language on there that said, it's not to be traded on any exchange.
Okay.
Okay. It's not on any exchange market. It's different. On any exchange, unless, such a market develops for it. We don't expect a market to develop for it. Okay, so there's language there. There was a couple of reasons why it did get trading. Some of those pathways are indeed unscrupulous, and we'll get to that here shortly. But the intention was it wasn't supposed to be trade. You're supposed to keep that share in your account as a non-trading preferred share until sale or spin out of the assets when it would become something else entirely.
Okay.
Either the next bridge or which at that point in time wasn't named Next Bridge yet, or it, would have been sold to an oil and gas company.
Okay. So then what happened was the shares just started trading, right?
Yes. So one day in early October, a lot of people woke up and they saw that their preferred share, a lot of them had changed its name to MMTLP, and all of a sudden it had a cash value attached to it and you could trade it. And a lot of people were very surprised by this. And there was no announcement ahead of time. Right? It just showed up one day. Now, granted, there was a Finra notice on the daily list for Finra. However, nobody knew that this would have been MMTLP at the time. So who was paying attention to that, right? Nobody was religiously scrolling through Finra's daily list at the time. But yeah, it just appeared one day in early October, around the 7th or 8th, as MMTLP.
Okay. So then my understanding is what happened next was people were like, hang on, I can buy more of this because it seemed to them, or my understanding was that like they thought, okay, so they're sitting on what you described as the largest like onshore
Mhm.
find of oil in decades, and it seemed to be trading at quite a cheap price.
Right. I'm one of those people. I saw it as an opportunity to get more. So I was very, very excited. And I saw it as an opportunity to get more shares.
Okay, so what were they trading at roughly at that point when you realized this?
Okay, the first day it was trading, of course, everybody's talking about it. It depends what platform you were on, actually. It was either anywhere from 70 cents that day up until about a buck 20, depending on what platform you were on the first day. But within the first week of trading, it got up to $3 a share. Of course, then the price came back down rather quickly, but it got up to $3 a share rather quickly.
Okay, and like, what is like this seems like unless there are billions of the shares, that seems like a very low price for such a huge find. So like, what would your like at that point like what were you thinking price target wise?
Okay, well that's okay. So that is a question I get quite a bit. If the oil and gas is really there, it's that significant. Why is Torchlight or MMTLP? Why is it so low in price? Um, and there, it all comes down to your conviction and your speculation at this point in the game. You can say, yes, here's the evidence. What's at least publicly available evidence about the oil and gas, the publicly available evidence. There's some well logs there that you can go look at on the Railroad Commission. I made a video about those. There's, the PR stating that the third party report, they used Mike Mullen, who worked for Halliburton for some years and actually had a phone call with him. I talked on the phone with him for about an hour and he was telling me about his projects. And of course, he couldn't reveal any important or when I was really calling for information about the Oro Grande, he couldn't do that. But we talked about, other projects he worked on and how he cut his teeth and how he evaluates things and his methodologies. And it was really interesting. But you have this third party report, and the fact is that they had several geologists look at this, not just one. You have McCabe, who's a geologist, Masterson, who's a geologist. Okay. Then you bring in uh Zabowski, who worked on the Bakken Shale, and that's North and South Dakota. He worked on there. He was a big geologist up in the Bakken Shale. He even evaluated the oil and gas. And then you had the third party report from Mike Mullen from Stimulation Petrophysics who confirmed it all. So you had multiple geologists evaluating this, and they all agreed it was a very big oil and gas find. So much so that Torchlight focused on just getting through, all the economic hardship to keep this property, right? There were diamond hands in this property. They sold off other assets just to keep this property afloat. And that's, one of why when they chose to get out of the NASDAQ and let Meta take it over, one of the contingency was they would manage the asset how they saw fit. That was agreed upon, because that was basically their magnum opus. I want to say your magnum opus right there.
Yeah, well, I
But
mean
it
it's
all
their
comes down to
yeah.
conviction. Yeah, it comes down to conviction. They're currently not selling the oil, as I said. Metamaterials, they're a Canadian green company. As a result, if you want to be a Canadian green company, you can't have oil and gas sales or hydrocarbons on your books. So if they were to even sell oil and gas at that time, uh-uh. And the other asset that was selling oil and gas was actually operated by Hazelton Partners, MHP, which is Rich Masterson and Greg McCabe, those two. So the oil and gas that came out of that was actually on their books, not Meta's books. And that's even how they went around doing that. So Meta didn't have that negative impact on their books.
Okay. Right. So then um at some point then towards the end of last year, they
Hmm.
decided to take the company off the Nasdaq and make it like take it private.
Okay, so MMTLP was trading at this point when MMTLP started trading, it was the OTC. It was
Yeah.
trading on OTC. It was pink sheets. Uh, that was not brought on the OTC by anybody from Torchlight or Metamaterials. That was actually the result of a couple of market makers getting together, either on behalf of themselves or on behalf of a client, and they facilitated a market for this on the OTC. At the time, the Series A preferred share, in order to be more easier to disperse, was DTCC eligible. And that's part of the reason why it was able to start trading, is because they were advised at the time, you know, by one law firm. I said, hey, to make this, facilitating the preferred share, make it DTCC eligible so it can go in people's accounts really quickly. And there's no pushback from the brokerages saying, hey, there's this untradeable preferred share with the $0 value in the account just sitting there.
Mhm.
You have it DTCC eligible. Okay, it makes it easier. But at the same time, you had these market makers get together. There's already DTCC eligible for electronic trading. Okay. The first day it wasn't trading electronically. It stopped for a day and then it was trading electronically. So the market makers got together and then, yeah, MMTLP was created. The information used to file for it was actually old Torchlight information. It wasn't even current Torchlight information. It was old Torchlight information with a former CEO listed on there. It wasn't even the current CEO at the
Okay,
end of Torchlight. It was a
so
former one.
so hang on, let just pause there for 1 second. So the
Yeah.
market makers decided that they wanted this to be tradable, and they
Hmm.
faked like they were able to do it by using old information without the approval of either metamaterials or Torchlight.
Correct.
What?
Okay, so there
What?
was, yeah, so okay. It was again, it's OTC. So they were able to do it under the pretenses of pre-quoting a trade, pre-quoting. So Finra had a new rule set that came out in September 30th, that talked about, it was a revision to Form 211, which is what you needed to do this. And then the rule was 512C-11, but these were revisions. The new revision said that you couldn't pre-quote anything without company, permission. But they filed it right on the cusp. And actually, if you read this OCC memo that came out attached to the options, John Berta posted it. When that came out in June after the merger, it actually even said that we plan on this becoming tradable again sometime in the future.
Okay.
So it was pretty interesting. But yeah, how that got facilitated by market makers, yeah, it was old information. Metamaterials went to Finra after it started trading, and I'm sure Houston Wade told you this, but Finra went too late. It's already Pandora's box is open. Too
Yeah,
late.
this that sounds just fucking insane. So they didn't approve this, and two market makers like just decided
Well,
this would happen,
the
sort of.
company didn't approve it. Yeah, the
Yeah,
company didn't approve it. Yeah, but Finra did allow it to
yeah,
happen. Yeah,
yeah.
Finra.
But
Yeah,
but
Finra
that
said
just
go
seems
on ahead.
fucking insane. That Finra can just be like, well, what do you want us to do about
It's
it?
it's
Like,
it's different now, but yeah, at the time, yeah, when they went to the company, because it was past that rule change. That, yeah, it was very interesting how that happened. That's a big proponent. That actually caused a lot of tension between a lot of people, because people like me were buying shares of MMTLP. I saw it as an opportunity to get more. There's also groups of people who saw this as like a trick, or that these shares were fake, or that they weren't real shares. And so there was actually quite a division of people with the preferred share at the time, that if it was even valid or not.
okay,
Of course, that was later on confirmed to be, that all shares of MMTLP certainly were owed or should be owed a share of Nextbridge.
Okay. Right. Okay, so then what happened after this? Because then we have to still get to the point where it's
Right. Okay.
TLP gets they wanted to pull it from the market then ultimately.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how did we get to that
So yeah,
point?
sure. So MMTLP was spitting out into a new company. Originally, they had it as Oil Co., but then, Oil Co. is just a general spin out placeholder name. And then it was revealed Nextbridge Hydrocarbons. Here comes Nextbridge. And they filed the S1 for Nextbridge Hydrocarbons in July of 2022
Okay.
is when they filed it. It was when the first S1 for Nextbridge Hydrocarbons was filed, saying, hey, we're going to spin out into a private company. It's public reporting because, we're going to have more shareholders than the threshold. So it's going to be a public reporting company, but it's going to be private in terms of how it's treated, not going to be traded, not going to be traded, of course, on any open market or exchange. It's not going to be DTCC eligible. Okay, they learned they're not DTCC eligible. Lesson learned. This is going to be a private share. And that was in July.
Okay.
Is when the S1 was filed. But we were told that the spin out was going to happen actually in late December of 2021. We were told that the spin out was going to happen. And that was even in the prospectus at the time. If sale didn't happen by December 2021, then it would spin out. It took them some time, though, to get the documents in order. 7 months.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of time. Okay, so then they're saying, right, okay, so this is going to go and become a privately traded, so Nextbridge Hydrocarbons is going to become a privately traded company. And they had to say, okay, so what that means that they have to pull or stop the trading on MMTLP, right?
Correct. Yeah. So how it works is Meta had the Nextbridge shares, and they were going to issue that in exchange for MMTLP, and MMTLP was going to be deleted.
Okay.
They had a corporate action notice, and the dates were there. Even there's a PR that came out that all holders who had basically a settled share of MMTLP by December 13th was going to receive a share of Nextbridge. And
okay.
the last, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then, from what Houston had mentioned, that there is speculation that there had been a whole bunch of synthetic shares generated by market makers in this period, basically between TLP starting trading on some sort of market, and then the moment at which they had to say, okay, so you're now going to exchange them, and there should be this many shares, and we're going to change them for these privately owned what will be Nextbridge Hydrocarbons. So then, what the fuck happened? And because from my understanding is, you're still waiting for those shares, right?
Pretty much, yes. We were still waiting for the shares, more or less, yes.
Okay, so yeah, would you like to explain how the fuck it's possible that that you just don't get the because it just seems like it's a very simple transaction. There should be 10 million, I know that's probably not the number, but there should be, for example, 10 million shares of this company, and then you're going to come and say, okay, we're going to take these all off, and everyone that has one is going to get one of these new ones, right? Why the fuck did that not just happen immediately? What's been the hold up here?
Right. So let's go back to Torch, because that's kind of where it starts again. Torch was a very heavily shorted company, and most of the shorts going into the reverse takeover were not settled. Believe it or not, they were not settled. And the fact that
shorts didn't close their position. What?
They did not. Yeah, of course, never.
I don't believe that. Short hedge funds are normally so reputable And they always follow the rules,
honest.
and honest actors in this wonderfully free and well regulated market that we are witnessing here.
S- of course. The OCC memo again said that we expect this to trade. It's not going to trade, and it gave the date for October 7th on there, which is like when MMTLP came out, right? So already they had anticipated this. As a result, there was nobody forcing shorts to close their positions. Okay, so you go into this reverse takeover with all these unclosed positions, right? Already a heavily shorted company. And here's all these, new Series A preferred shares, which are basically, self-doled out by the brokers. There's no value or anything attached to them, so whatever, it's sitting in there. And then, of course, it starts trading, and of course, it gets shorted some more. And we know that because it was on the threshold list for about 46 consecutive days on the OTC threshold list.
Oh
And in
wow.
fact, it ended the last day of trading still on the threshold list, right? And those positions still haven't been closed out yet. So
No, that was on
we
the
know,
threshold list right at the end.
yes. And those positions aren't still closed out. There was no corporate action to close them out. Brokerages were letting people short run until the end. Of course, it was on the threshold list through the end of trading day. And, there's been no way to reconcile the shares since. So we know that there's at least some outstanding shares. To what extent, you can do some math and probability and, take sample sizes and kind of extrapolate
Hmm.
from there, which I have some videos on, which I've done. And I've, extrapolated. Me and I talk with this other gentleman. His name is Tony. He has a YouTube channel, Market Moves with Tony. We both do math together. We both come to the conclusion, yeah, about, 480 to 500 million shares could be there, more or
Okay.
less.
How many should there
Uh,
be?
it it should be on the books. Okay, so for MMTLP specifically, 165.5 million. However, I will say NextBridge is going to have more because McCabe converted some of his other interest in the Oro Grande to shares. Like all the other interested parties in the Oro Grande came together into NextBridge. So I've always accounted for that and expected that to happen. So all my videos like reflected that event. But as far as MMTLP to NextBridge holders, Torchlight to next bridge holders, there should be 165.5 million
Okay. And you think there's
there.
somewhere in the range of 500 to 600 million?
I think that there's somewhere in the range actually of like 388 to 500 million. That's me
Okay.
personally. It
Okay.
might be more though, but that's next bridge has authorized up to 500 million shares. That's of course that's not how it's going to work that everybody just gets a free share of next bridge. The shorts aren't going to get a free share of next bridge. Of course, they got to get that share somehow. They got to buy back that share somehow, but trading on MMTLP ended about 2 days too soon. So there was no reconciliation days. There was a Finra U3 halt put out there the morning of December 8th, I think it was. Let me go back to December 9th. Friday morning, December 9th, it was put out there. The U3 halt, no trading. It said no trading until the halt's going to be there until MMTLP is canceled and next bridge share is given
Okay.
until that event occurs.
Okay, so right, let me just like rewind here and make sure I've got everything straight. So
Sure.
basically, the company, so Torchlight had been heavily shorted, as we discussed at the beginning. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then when the merger happened, those short positions had not yet been closed out, right? So then,
Correct.
then for all of the preferred Class A shares that had been, or Series A, that had been like that you were meant to get, they were worthless theoretically. They had no price attached to them, right?
Right. They had no price attached to them.
Not worthless, no price attached to them. So then,
Correct.
so then because they were being self-distributed by the brokers, they just generated as many of those as they had like shares on their books, right? Okay.
Right.
Which meant that there was already loads of extras of those floating around, but it didn't really matter
Correct.
to anyone because there was no cash price attached to it, so nobody asked any questions.
Right. And it wasn't supposed to trade. Nobody really asked any questions.
Okay. So then these market makers come along. They create a market for it against the well, not against, but without the without any input from the company whatsoever. So then all
Correct.
of a sudden you're sitting with all of these things that were moments ago had no price value attached to them. Now have like a physical like price and like
Hmm.
weight within the market, right? So there's
Right.
already loads of this like seemingly magic money that has appeared out of nowhere, right? Due to what's happened, what we've discussed, and then on top of that, then they start shorting it further, and leads to
Hmm.
like somewhere between like 2 to 3 times as many shares as should exist circulating in
Right.
in the markets. Then they go to halt the trading in order to remove these shares from the market and exchange them for the next bridge ones. But it gets halted early, and then the
Yes.
short positions never get closed out, and therefore there's like 2 to 3 times as many people now vying for shares of NextBridge through their previous holdings of MMT
Hmm.
TLP, and there has been no reconciliation of this situation at all, and it's been like what, almost 2 months.
Correct. You are correct. Yeah, it's been over 6 weeks at this point. Yep. No reconciliation.
What? Like, I've listened to you explain this, but it still seems insane that this is
Isn't
going
it?
on. What is the fuck is
Kudos to you for understanding all of that. Thank you. Kudos. You got it right. It's not easy to understand.
Well, I mean, I still don't understand what the fuck has happened. So right, so
So,
how does the trading
mhm.
stop 2 days early without like surely this
So
yeah.
FINRA, so the last 2 days were really a reconciliation days, right? So if you had bought your share of NextBridge on the 8th or before, you would be entitled, if you bought MMTLP on the 8th or before of December, you'd be entitled to NextBridge. If you sold on the 9th or the 11th, you would lose that entitlement, right? You couldn't double dip it. You couldn't sell it, get the money, and then get the right to the share. You couldn't double dip it. I call it double dipping. No double dipping. Whoever bought it technically would get the right. But then there was another clause in there that said, if you buy it on this day, you're not going to get the right to that share either. So what's left is if you're short on it, you have to close out your position. That's the only way it does it. And more or less it would basically there had been a deletion, which it basically would have canceled out the debt shorts would own reconciliation days, but of course it was halted by Finra, and a lot of people were left going, because we had the option at that point. It's like, well, if we don't want next bridge or hold or wait, we have 2 days to think about it, right? To make a decision. And then if there's any shares bought on any of those 2 days, you knew that there was evidence of shorting, right? Because they'd have to buy to close out their positions. But of course, it was U3 halted. That happened that morning. And the Finra gives it under the guise of, there's more information today about it from a Finra response to Rosa Twill's filings with the courts. Finra claims that, okay, an extraordinary event has occurred, and thus we are protecting investors by halting this. And, there's this extraordinary event. They're not being specific. They just, say extraordinary event has occurred and or it's a settlement issue. We are protecting investors. So we have halted this, and we are justified in doing so because an extraordinary event has happened. And of course, all right, well, great, but
Yeah.
nobody can reconcile the shares. There's lots of short positions, and now they're in a private company. Short. They're in a private company short.
I'm so confused about how this is allowed to happen. Like is in like right in a situation like this, right,
Hmm.
where a company's like deciding they're okay, we're going to pull our shares off and we're going to replace them with this new privately owned thing.
Hmm.
Is there nobody in any financial regulatory, whether that's like agency or like clearing house, or like
Hmm.
whether that's the DTCC, whether that's like the Finra, whether it's the SEC, who you feel maybe you should be involved somewhere when there's like, you know, something like this involved, like
Hmm.
some sort of agency or group or body who goes, okay, so right, how many shorts do we have? Like how many people are short on
Hmm.
on this company? So right, here's all the people that need to close out their positions. Like, you know, make it happen.
Sure.
Is there no one that's like watching this aside from like people on
Okay.
the internet like
Ah.
screaming into a void, going, "What the fuck is going on?"
Okay, there is an agency that does that sort of, but they don't watch it like you think they do. It's the DTCC, and it's called the Continuous Net Settlement.
Yeah.
And that's basically, but that's more or less off of the net, your net longs, right? And since none of the positions were settled out, now it's all gross longs that need a share, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
net longs, it's all gross because nothing got settled out. So there's, yeah, a lot more shares left in the books. It should be DTCC usually settles the books. That's their job. You know, FINRA oversees the rules, and then SEC is a part of it. Basically, there was a lot of, you know, a lot of entities just said, no, it's fine. It's fine. That's my opinion. Why it happened and allowed to go on for that long is the $1 million question.
It's baffling. So right, so what are the details of this lawsuit that's been filed then by this
Okay,
woman,
yeah.
Rosa
So Rosa Twill,
Rosa Twill?
she, yes, she basically filed that she wanted the two trading days back. It wasn't suing for any monetary damages. It was, hey, we want the two trading days back. And I believe this is why. And she even said nothing was settled out. I want the two trading days back. And Finner just made a response to that today. I read through it the first time. So I can't really comment on it now. I'd like to digest it more. But so Finra is not a government agency. They're a government approved agency
Oh,
that's self-regulated, right? So of course we're gonna do an internal investigation about it. No, we're fine, right? They're a self-regulated organization, and because they're in a government approved agency, you really can't sue them. And they actually claim this on against Rosa Twill, like, hey, we have immunity. We have absolute immunity. You can't touch us. They use that line quite a bit in those papers. But she's more or less fighting for getting the two trading days back. You know, not monetary compensation for damages. She wants those two trading days back.
right. So I'm just looking up exactly who Finra are, like who owns or is Finra. It's just
Right.
so it says that chief executive officer, the board is the CEO of Finra, the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange regulation, 11 public governors and 10 industry governors. So just, yeah, some industry insiders essentially.
Pretty
Uh,
much. So,
and they're
yeah,
they're all
one.
like, "Oh,
Mhm.
we'll totally regulate ourselves, just because, you know,
Yeah.
trust us. It's okay."
It's okay. Trust us. We're experts on the market. Interestingly
You
enough,
wouldn't understand this. Too complicated.
it's more or less. So one of the market makers, so the two market makers that started trading MMTLP was Canaccord Genuity and Global Trading Solutions.
Mhm.
The CEO of Global Trading Solutions, Ari Rubenstein, actually sits on one of the FINRA advisory committees. He sits on the FINRA Market Surveillance Advisory Committee.
Oh,
And he
okay.
was
So we
on the
could
FINRA.
trust. So we could trust him.
He
Okay.
he was even on the Finra Market Surveillance Advisory Committee at the time that MMTLP was trading. I got a letter from Finra stating that. So, uh, he even was on there. So there you go. It's of course.
Right. Well, so then, what do you think is going to happen with this lawsuit? Do you think that you'll get the trading days back, and then
Um,
theoretically, what happens with the price?
well, so it's not really just Rosa that's working at it. Rosa's one person. She's an independent woman, and she's fighting what she believes for is right, which is two trading days. And a lot of people also believe this to be correct. They want two trading days. I'd like to see some reconciliation of the shares. There was a new company called Flamethrower. The PR for it came out last week, 2 weeks ago. Some of the older, by older, I mean 2018 and prior, Torchlight holders had gotten together and created their own company, Flamethrower LLC, which has hired Wes Christian.
Oh, really?
And Wes Christian is now, yeah, now they've
Mm.
hired him to, help facilitate, push this in a direction. I'm not sure what direction yet, right? I don't know what direction yet this is going. We only know that, yes, indeed, they've hired him to investigate, the whole Bridge MMTLP debacle. And he's a pretty heavy hitter, and he doesn't take small cases either.
No, he does not. That's very interesting. Okay, well, Miss Roller Pigeon, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's getting very late over here,
Likewise.
so I am gonna have to shoot because I will fall asleep very soon.
Sure.
Not that this is not riveting, but I've had an incredibly long day. So, yeah. Do you want to? Is there anything you want to plug before we finish up here?
Um, I don't know. Sorry, I'm usually not in these kind of situations. I don't know. I say get some rest. Take care of yourself. So yeah, get some rest. This is a very tiring situation. A lot of us hope that we'll see some sort of settlement, reconciliation, trading soon, something to get at least the short shares reconciled off the books because it was bare minimum. This was on the restricted, the it was on the restricted list for Finra through the last day of trading, right? Because it was shorted that much on the OTC, had that many failed to delivers. They didn't deliver, had failed to delivers. Nothing was reconciled. So you know that there are shares that do need to be reconciled still.
Yes. Well, GameStop holders will be very familiar with this idea of FTDs and things never being
Of
reconciled.
course.
So it is a story we are well versed in, and hence what, because if one company can do it, then
Right.
perhaps many companies can shine a light upon the just obscene numbers of failed to delivers that exist within the US financial system on a daily basis.
Oh yeah.
And maybe it might force a conversation about transparency and, same day settlements and the fact that fails to deliver just probably should not exist in a modern market. But those are all stories for another day. So yeah, people, please check out Bird Lady's YouTube channel. I will link it in the description below, and your Twitter account as well. And yeah, have a great day.
Okay. Take care. Have a good night. Get some rest. See ya.
Thanks. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.